The night was cold and empty. In the broken city, shadows stretched across the cracked streets, and silence ruled, broken only by the wind pushing dust around. Between ruined buildings, in a narrow alley where no one dared to walk, a small figure sat curled against a wall. Her arms hugged her knees tightly. Her long, tangled hair covered most of her face, and her skin was layered with dirt and filth. The smell around her was strong enough that even rats avoided coming too close. She had lived like this for so long that she could no longer remember the last time anyone had touched her without disgust. Children who once saw her used to throw stones, laughing when she cried out. Adults would spit in her direction, muttering the same words again and again. Filthy, cursed, unclean. She had learned to move silently, like a shadow, stealing scraps of food from trash piles or gutters when no one was watching. At night, she buried herself under broken cloth and waited for sleep to hide her misery. But her eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, betrayed her truth. Those eyes belonged to someone who once came from a noble family. Now they were only a reminder of the life stolen from her. She pressed her back to the cold wall and closed her eyes. Hunger twisted her stomach. She tried to remember when she last ate, but the memory slipped away. The world had forgotten her. She told herself that maybe it was better this way, better to be invisible than to suffer their words and hate. Still, a part of her longed to be seen, not as dirt, not as filth, but as alive. She wished for a hand to reach out, but no hand ever came. Tonight felt the same. She shivered, curling tighter. The air smelled of smoke from a distant fire, and faint echoes of boots clicked against stone. She froze. Footsteps. Soldiers often patrolled these ruins. If they found her, they would chase her away like always, or worse. Her heart pounded, and she pressed herself deeper into the shadows, hoping the darkness would hide her scent. The footsteps drew closer. Slow, heavy. One pair only. She risked lifting her head, strands of dirty hair falling from her face. In the dim light of the broken street lamps, she saw him, a human soldier. Tall, broad shoulders, carrying a rifle on his back, his face partly hidden under a helmet. His boots stopped only a few steps from her hiding place. She waited for him to spit, to turn away in disgust, or shout at her to leave. Instead, he froze. His eyes locked on hers. For the first time in years, someone didn't look at her with hatred. His face showed surprise, yes, and even confusion, but not hate. She didn't move, afraid that if she did, he would break the moment, turn away, and leave her alone in the dark again. The soldier tilted his head, as if trying to see her more clearly. She knew what he saw, the dirt on her skin, the rags clinging to her body, the wild hair, and of course, the smell that hung heavy around her. His nose twitched, and she thought he would back away. But he didn't. She swallowed hard, her voice trapped in her throat. The silence stretched, heavier and heavier, until she couldn't bear it anymore. She lowered her head, trying to hide, ashamed of what she was. She wished she could sink into the ground and vanish. But then she heard his boots scrape against the stone. He had stepped closer. Her breath caught. No one ever came closer. People threw things from far away, shouted from safe distances, but never stepped near. Fear mixed with something she didn't understand. Why? Why would he? The soldier bent slightly, his face still calm. He said nothing, but the way he looked at her was different. He didn't see a monster. He didn't see a curse. He only saw someone trembling in the cold. His eyes carried no pity, only a strange kind of concern. Her heart thumped so loudly she thought he could hear it. She wanted to run, but her legs were too weak. She wanted to shout at him to go away, but the words would not come. She sat frozen, waiting for whatever came next. The wind howled through the alley, lifting dust and scraps of paper. The soldier's shadow stretched over her, tall and strong, as if shielding her from the night. For the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, the darkness was not the only place she belonged. She dared to look up again, meeting his eyes. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The ruined city, the cold, the hunger, all of it fell away. Only two people remained in that silent alley, a girl who had been despised by the world, and a human who did not yet walk away. Her body trembled, not from cold this time, but from the strange fire of hope, fragile and dangerous. She feared it would vanish the second he left. She waited for him to break the silence, to speak, to prove her fears true. But he only stood there, still, his face unreadable. In her chest, something stirred. She did not know if it was fear, longing, or both. She had been a shadow for so long, unseen and unwanted. And yet in that one moment, under the dim light of the ruined street, someone had finally seen her. Would he leave? Would he stay? The question burned inside her. For the first time in forever, her future didn't feel like only darkness. Suspense hung heavy in the air, every second stretching like an eternity as the human soldier remained there, close enough to change everything. Mark's boots made a soft crunch on the broken stones as he stood in front of the girl. He could see her small frame trembling, half hidden in the shadows. At first, he thought she might be dangerous. The war had filled the ruins with strange traps, desperate thieves, and even feral survivors who attacked soldiers on sight. His hand brushed the rifle on his back, ready in case she moved suddenly. But then his eyes adjusted to the dim light, and what he saw was not a threat. She was thin, almost skeletal, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her hair hung in filthy strands, and her eyes, two faintly glowing orbs, looked more tired than hostile. The smell hit him next. It was strong, almost unbearable. His first instinct was to step back, but he forced himself not to. His training told him to move on, to ignore her. She wasn't his problem, but something deep inside him wouldn't let him turn away. He saw her hands twitch toward her mouth, as if she wanted to speak, but had forgotten how. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. He crouched down, lowering himself to her level. "When was the last time you had food?" he asked quietly. His voice was calm, steady, not like the harsh tone of other soldiers. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she lowered her head, hiding her face again as if ashamed. Her silence cut deeper than any words could. Mark reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a small ration pack. Inside was a piece of dry bread, hard, tasteless, but better than nothing. He broke it in half and slowly extended it toward her. She stared at his hand, eyes wide, like she couldn't believe it was real. Her body shook with hesitation, torn between fear and hunger. Finally, hunger won. Her hand darted out, snatching the bread so fast it was almost a blur. She cradled it close to her chest like treasure, then stuffed it into her mouth, chewing desperately, not caring about crumbs falling to the ground. Mark's chest tightened as he watched. No one should eat like that. No one should live like that. Behind him, the sound of other boots echoed down the street. Mark turned his head slightly. Two of his fellow soldiers were approaching, carrying their rifles casually. When they saw him crouched near the girl, their faces twisted with disgust. "What the hell are you doing, Mark?" one of them muttered. "Don't go near her. She's cursed." "Filthy thing," the other spat. "They spread disease. Leave her. Orders are clear. Stay away." Mark didn't answer. He looked back at the girl. Her shoulders had tightened, her glowing eyes flicking between the soldiers and the bread in her hands. She was ready to bolt like a cornered animal. He knew if she ran, they would shoot her down without hesitation. "Relax," he told her softly, though he wasn't sure if she even understood his language. He kept his voice low, calm, the same way one would soothe a frightened child. His fellow soldiers stepped closer, their disgust turning into irritation. "Mark, come on. Don't waste your time. That thing's not worth saving." But he didn't move. Something in him refused to step away. He could still hear the way she had snatched the bread, the sound of desperate chewing. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't cursed. She was starving, abandoned, alone. He stood up slowly, turning toward his companions. "Go on ahead. I'll catch up." The first soldier scowled. "Don't be stupid. She'll only bring trouble." Mark's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his silence was firm. His eyes warned them not to push further. The soldiers exchanged a look, then muttered curses under their breath before walking away, disappearing into the ruins. Their footsteps faded, leaving the alley quiet once more. Mark exhaled slowly, then turned back to the girl. She was still there, crouched low, her body tense. She expected him to leave too, like everyone always did. She expected him to turn his back and walk away, leaving her to rot in the shadows. But instead, he crouched again, meeting her eyes. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. His words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. She blinked at him, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe. The bread was gone now. Her lips trembled, crumbs sticking to her skin. Her eyes filled with something fragile, fear mixed with confusion. Why hadn't he left? Why hadn't he spat at her like the others? She couldn't understand it. Mark reached into his pack again and pulled out a small canteen of water. He unscrewed the lid and held it toward her. Here, drink. Her hand shook as she reached out, taking it slowly this time. She sniffed at the water first, as if expecting poison. Then, cautiously, she drank. The water dribbled down her chin, soaking the dirty cloth tied around her neck, but she didn't care. She drank like someone who hadn't felt clean water on her lips in years. Mark watched in silence, his heart heavy. Every sip she took, every tremble in her thin hands made him more certain. Orders or not, he couldn't leave her here. When she finished, she looked at him again. For the briefest moment, her lips parted. A sound escaped, soft, broken, almost like a word, though too quiet to hear clearly. Then she lowered her gaze, as if ashamed for even trying. Mark didn't press her. He only said one word, safe. He tapped his chest, then pointed to her, repeating it softly. Safe. Her eyes glistened, the faint glow reflecting in the darkness. She didn't understand everything he said, but that word safe echoed inside her like a light piercing through years of shadows. Mark stood, scanning the street. Danger was everywhere in this ruined city. If others saw her with him, things would turn violent. He knew he had a choice, walk away or take the risk. His boots shifted on the stones, and for a moment it seemed he might leave. Her breath caught in her throat, her body frozen in dread. But then he extended his hand toward her, not to strike, not to push her away, to help her up. Her eyes widened. No one had ever offered her a hand before. The world had only given her hate, stones, and spit. And now, here was this human, defying everyone else, reaching for her like she mattered. Her fingers twitched, hesitating, trembling. Then, slowly, she reached back. Their hands touched, and in that instant, the world shifted. Two shadows in the ruins had found each other, and nothing would ever be the same again. Mark guided her through the ruined streets, keeping his steps slow so she wouldn't stumble. The girl followed, her bare feet scraping against the cold stone. Every few steps, she glanced back, afraid someone would appear and drag her away. Her thin fingers clutched the side of his jacket, as if letting go would mean vanishing back into the shadows forever. The city smelled of smoke, iron, and dust, but the closer she stayed to him, the safer she felt. For years, people had shouted at her to stay away, but this human drew her closer without saying a word. He stopped at a broken house on the edge of the street. Its roof sagged, and its windows were cracked, but the walls still stood strong enough to keep the wind out. Mark pushed the door open with his shoulder, the hinges squealing. Inside, it was dark, but not frightening, at least not to him. To her, it felt like a trap. Her chest tightened. She froze in the doorway, staring at the dim interior. Mark noticed her hesitation. "It's all right," he said softly. His voice was calm, steady, and kind, but she didn't trust it. Her body trembled, and suddenly she tried to pull away, her eyes wide with panic. She thought he had brought her here to punish her, to mock her in secret, maybe even to hurt her. Her kind had done far worse to her when no one was watching. Her breathing turned sharp, her feet scraping backward. Mark didn't chase her. He raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. "Easy. I'm not here to harm you." His tone was patient. He stood still, letting her decide. Her chest heaved as she studied him, searching for the cruelty she expected, but it never came. His eyes were steady, clear, and calm. Finally, after what felt like forever, she stepped inside. The air inside the house was thick with dust. Mark moved carefully, clearing a small table of broken tools and rusted cans. He set down his pack, then reached into it. The girl flinched, her eyes narrowing, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a battered metal pot. He filled it with water from his canteen and placed it over a small portable burner. The hiss of fire made her jump, but the warmth that followed was different from the biting cold outside. When the water began to steam, he rummaged again and brought out a small bar of soap. He glanced at her, then at the pot. Her confusion deepened. She had never seen soap before, at least not in years. She backed toward the wall, shaking her head violently. Her lips parted in broken whispers, though no clear words came out. She thought he wanted to drown her or burn her skin. Mark shook his head gently. No, not like that. He dipped a cloth into the warm water, wrung it out, and then rubbed the soap onto it. White foam spread across the surface. He held it up, showing her clearly. Then he crouched low, dipping the cloth again, and wiped his own hands slowly. He showed her how the dirt lifted away. Then, carefully, he extended the cloth toward her. Her eyes widened. The scent of the soap was strange, sharp but clean, nothing like the stench that clung to her. She pressed herself harder against the wall, still unsure. Mark didn't push. He placed the cloth on the table and backed away, giving her space. Minutes passed. The steam drifted through the small room, filling it with warmth. Her body, still pressed to the wall, slowly began to relax. Her curiosity fought against her fear. Finally, trembling, she stepped forward and picked up the cloth. It was warm in her hands. She raised it hesitantly to her arm and wiped. A layer of black filth smeared onto the cloth instantly. She gasped softly, staring at her own skin. Beneath the dirt, faint glowing patterns shimmered across her flesh, patterns she had forgotten even existed. Mark watched silently. He saw her shock, her disbelief, and his chest tightened with respect. She wasn't filthy at all. She had been hidden under years of neglect. Her kind carried natural marks on their bodies, glowing faintly like stars. He had never seen such a thing up close. But she couldn't reach everywhere. Her arms shook from weakness, and when she tried to wipe her back, she dropped the cloth. Mark stepped forward carefully, picking it up. She stiffened, her eyes flashing with fear. He paused, waiting, and then spoke quietly. "Let me help." She froze, breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said that to her. Help? Her mind screamed to run, but her body stayed rooted. Slowly, almost against her own will, she nodded. Mark dipped the cloth again and began to wipe her arms gently. She tensed at first, her body rigid, but the warmth of the water soothed her. Bit by bit, the filth peeled away. Brown layers turned to gray, then finally to the pale color of her true skin. The glowing patterns spread further, catching the light like faint rivers of fire beneath her skin. When he moved to her face, she almost cried out, but he was careful, wiping gently around her cheeks and forehead. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of dirt lift. It was strange, frightening, but also wonderful. The smell that had followed her everywhere began to fade. Tears welled in her eyes as she touched her clean skin. She barely recognized herself. She staggered to a broken mirror, leaning against the wall, and stared. Her reflection was fragile, thin, but no longer hidden beneath filth. She whispered a sound, a name, soft and trembling. Lyra. Mark's head lifted at the sound. He had finally heard her voice. The first word she had given him was her name. Lyra. He repeated it softly, as if tasting the sound. She looked at him, eyes shining with a mix of fear and hope, her chest rising and falling fast. In that broken room, something had changed. She was no longer the filthy shadow everyone despised. She was Lyra, seen again for the first time. And Mark, standing beside her, felt his decision settle deep inside him. He could never abandon her now. The cracked mirror leaned against the wall, its surface cloudy and broken at the corners, yet it was enough for Lyra to see herself. Her hand rose slowly, almost shaking as she touched her cheek. Her skin, once covered in years of grime, now glowed faintly with the natural markings of her kind. She had almost forgotten what it looked like. For years, she had believed the filth was all that remained of her identity. But now, staring at her reflection, she saw a glimpse of who she had once been. Her lips trembled, and tears filled her eyes. She whispered her name again, softer this time, Lyra, as if saying it could remind her that she was still alive. Mark stood a few steps behind her, watching in silence. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, only listened. The name sounded fragile, like a secret that had been locked away for too long. He repeated it quietly, Lyra. She turned her head sharply, surprised that he said it with respect instead of mockery. His voice carried no disgust, only acknowledgement. She leaned back against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. For a long moment, she stayed quiet, clutching her knees. Then, with a trembling breath, she began to speak in broken words. Her voice cracked as if unused for years, but the meaning was clear. She told him she had not always been like this. Her family had once belonged to a noble house in the alien city. They had wealth, honor, and protection. She was a child then, never knowing hunger or shame. But when the war came, her father was accused of betrayal. She didn't understand the details, only that whispers spread fast, and the people turned against them. Soldiers stormed their home. Her parents were dragged away, and she never saw them again. She had been young, confused, and terrified. The crowd had thrown her into the streets, shouting that she was cursed like her father. From that day on, no one touched her. No one offered her food, not even pity. Her body became weak, and her scent grew worse each day because of the untreated sickness. She had begged for help at first, but every plea was answered with stones and spit. Eventually, she stopped speaking at all, hiding in alleys and shadows. She became nothing but a filthy ghost that children mocked and adults ignored. As she spoke, her voice broke into sobs, but she didn't stop. The words poured out like poison she had carried for years. Mark's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. He had seen the cruelty of war, but hearing it through her fragile voice was different. It wasn't just battlefields and soldiers, it was a single girl abandoned by her entire world. When her story ended, she wiped at her tears quickly, ashamed to show weakness. She expected him to look at her with the same disgust others had, now that he knew the truth. But when she glanced at him, his eyes burned not with hate, but with anger. Anger for what had been done to her. "You're not cursed," Mark said firmly. His voice was steady, strong, like an anchor in a storm. "You're alive. That's all that matters." Lyra stared at him, stunned. No one had ever said those words to her. She wanted to believe, but doubt still clung to her heart. She shook her head, whispering, "No, they will never let me live. I am nothing." Before he could answer, a sound shattered the fragile calm. Heavy boots struck against stone outside. Voices called out sharply, echoing through the broken streets. Lyra's body stiffened instantly. She knew those voices, soldiers. Mark's expression hardened. He moved quickly, grabbing his pack and motioning for her to stay quiet. Lyra's heart pounded as she heard the voices grow louder. "Search every corner," one soldier barked. "We know she's hiding nearby." Her breath came fast, panic rising in her chest. She scrambled toward the wall, ready to vanish into any crack or hole like she had done so many times before. But this time was different. She wasn't alone. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide with fear. The door rattled as a fist slammed against it. "Open up! We know you're in there," Lyra whispered, trembling. "They'll kill me if they find me. Please, please let me run." She tried to rise, but her legs were too weak. Mark crouched beside her. His hand pressed gently against her shoulder, holding her still. "No," he whispered firmly. "You're not running alone anymore." The pounding on the door grew louder. Dust rained from the ceiling as the hinges shook. Lyra's body trembled violently, every muscle screaming with fear. Her instincts told her to flee, to vanish into the shadows where she had survived before. But his words held her in place. Mark scanned the small house quickly, spotting a broken window at the back. He grabbed her hand without hesitation. His grip was strong, steady, unshaken. "Come on." For the first time, she didn't resist. She let him pull her to her feet, her legs barely holding her up. Together, they rushed to the window. Mark pushed it open, the wood creaking, and helped her climb through. Just as her feet touched the ground outside, the front door burst open with a crash. "Find them!" the soldiers roared. Mark swung himself out of the window and landed beside her. He glanced once at her terrified face, then whispered, "Stay close." Without another word, he pulled her into the night, away from the voices that wanted her dead. Her heart raced as they ran. The city that had always been her prison now became a maze of escape. For the first time, she wasn't running alone. Suspense clung to every shadow, every corner, but in her chest a fragile hope flickered. Someone had chosen to stand with her, and that made all the difference. The night air was sharp against their skin as Mark pulled Lyra through the narrow alleys, his hand gripping hers tightly so she would not fall behind. Shouts echoed behind them, soldiers calling orders, boots slamming against stone. The ruined city that had once been silent now came alive with the sound of the hunt. Lyra's breath came in quick, shallow bursts. Her legs shook under her thin body. Every step a struggle. She had survived years, hiding in the shadows, but running at this speed was something her body no longer remembered how to do. She stumbled once, nearly falling to her knees. Mark caught her quickly, lifting her before she could collapse. "Don't stop," he whispered. His voice calm even as his heart raced. Her glowing eyes met his for a brief second, full of panic and shame. She wanted to tell him to leave her behind, that she was slowing him down, but her throat was too tight with fear. He didn't wait for her to argue. He pulled her closer and carried her in his arms. The weight of her body was almost nothing. She was so thin, so fragile, that he could feel her bones beneath the cloth of her rags. Still, she clung to him, her arms weak but desperate around his neck. The smell that once had made even animals flee was fading now after the wash, replaced by the faint, clean scent of soap. Mark tightened his hold, ignoring the ache in his muscles as he ran. Behind them, the soldiers' voices grew louder. "Through here!" one shouted. "Don't let them escape!" Mark darted through a broken archway, the stones crumbling under his boots. He entered a wide street filled with ruins. The moonlight poured down, silver and cold, illuminating Lyra's glowing skin. For a moment, she looked like a lantern in his arms, her faint patterns shining in the night. It was beautiful, but dangerous. "They'll see us," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since she had spoken her name. Mark glanced at her quickly. He saw the truth. Her glow betrayed them. But he didn't let fear take him. "Then we move faster," he replied. His voice carried certainty, as if his strength alone could carry them to safety. The soldiers emerged behind them, rifles glinting in the moonlight. Shots cracked through the night, bullets sparking against stone. Lyra cried out and buried her face against his chest. But Mark did not falter. He turned sharply, sprinting toward an old stairway that led underground. The stairway descended into darkness, the air turning damp and cold. Mark moved quickly, lowering his steps to silence. Lyra clutched his shirt, her heart pounding so loud she thought the soldiers above could hear it. The sounds of boots grew distant, muffled by stone. At last, silence returned. Mark stopped in the middle of the tunnel. The dim light of his small lamp revealed cracked walls and dripping water. He set her down gently against the wall, letting her catch her breath. Her body shook, her chest heaving. For a long moment, neither spoke, the only sound the echo of their breathing. Finally, Lyra whispered, "Why? Why are you helping me? No one ever has." Not once. Her voice cracked at the edges, and her glowing eyes searched his face for an answer she had waited years to hear. Mark sat down beside her, resting his back against the damp wall. He thought for a moment, then spoke simply. "Because you're alive, and that's enough reason." The words struck her harder than any blade. She stared at him, stunned, unable to understand. Her people had told her she was cursed, worthless, meant to rot in the shadows. But here was this human, speaking as if her life mattered without needing any explanation. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. She wanted to believe him, but her heart carried too many scars. She shook her head weakly. "If they find us, they'll kill you too." Mark's lips curved into a small smile, though his eyes remained serious. "Then they'll have to catch me first." His calm tone sent warmth through her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. She turned her face away quickly, hiding her tears. She didn't want him to see her cry, afraid it would make her look weak. But even in silence, he knew. The tunnel stretched before them, endless and dark. Strange sounds echoed, drips of water, scurrying rats, and something else, distant and unrecognizable. Lyra shivered, pressing closer to the wall. The safety of shadows had once been her only shield, but now in this place, the shadows seemed alive, whispering of dangers worse than soldiers. Mark adjusted his rifle, his senses sharp. He could feel it too. Something was moving in the dark. But he stayed calm. He leaned forward, checking the corners with the faint glow of his lamp. Lyra's hand reached out without thinking, brushing his sleeve. She pulled back instantly, ashamed, but he glanced at her and gave a small nod, as if to say it was all right. Minutes passed, heavy with suspense. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow deeper. Yet even in the cold and fear, Lyra felt something she had never felt before. Not complete safety, but something close, trust. Her body was weak, her heart full of doubt, but she knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. Mark finally lowered the lamp slightly and said, "We'll rest here for a while. Then we keep moving." Lyra leaned back, closing her eyes. She could still hear the distant horns of the soldiers above, their hunt far from over. But for now, in this hidden place, she had a moment of peace. She listened to the steady sound of Mark's breathing beside her, stronger and calmer than her own. That sound became her anchor in the storm. Her body trembled less. For the first time in years, she felt something fragile but real, a beginning of hope. Even if danger still chased them, even if shadows still lurked, she had found something she never thought possible. Someone who refused to leave her behind. In the silence of the tunnel, Lyra whispered so softly it was almost a secret, "Thank you." The words broke against her lips like a fragile song. Mark didn't answer right away, but his eyes softened as he looked at her. The darkness pressed in, heavy and unknown, but she no longer feared it the way she once did. For years, the shadows had been her prison. Now, with him beside her, they felt like only another path forward. The tunnels were cold and wet, their walls dripping with moisture that made every sound echo louder than it should. Mark found a corner where the stones were less broken and set his pack down. He motioned for Lyra to sit, and she obeyed, curling her legs close to her body like a frightened child. The dim light from his lamp flickered across her face, showing eyes that still carried fear, but also something new, curiosity. She glanced at him often, as if trying to understand why he stayed. Mark opened a ration pack and handed her another piece of bread. This time, she didn't snatch it like before. She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his hand for a second. He noticed the difference. She was learning he wouldn't take it back, that the food was truly hers. She chewed carefully, smaller bites, and he gave her water again, reminding her with a soft voice, "Slowly, don't rush." She nodded, her lips wet from the canteen, and for a moment, a small sound escaped her throat. It wasn't a word, not yet, but a soft laugh. Awkward, broken, but real. The sound surprised them both. Lyra quickly covered her mouth, ashamed. She hadn't laughed in years. Mark only smiled faintly, his eyes warm. "That's better," he said. His calm tone settled something inside her, like a gentle fire warming frozen bones. But even in that small piece, her voice carried warning. After eating, she whispered, "If they find us here, they will kill you too." Her glowing eyes met his, wide and filled with worry. She couldn't understand why he had chosen this path. Why risk himself for her? She had been nothing but a burden, a shadow dragging him down. Mark leaned back against the wall, folding his arms. His voice was steady, almost casual, when he answered, "Then we run together." The words struck her harder than any kindness he had shown before. Together. No one had ever included her in anything. For years, she had lived outside the world, unseen and unwanted. Now this human soldier had placed her in the same sentence as himself, as if her life carried weight equal to his own. She stared at him, breath caught, unable to respond. The silence between them grew heavy, but not uncomfortable. Lyra's heart pounded, her hands twisting the cloth of her rags. She wanted to say more, to ask him why, but her courage faltered. Instead, she stayed close, letting the warmth of his presence calm her shaking. A sound broke the stillness. Faint at first, then clearer, the scrape of something moving along the stone floor, deeper in the tunnel. Both of them froze. Mark's hand went immediately to his rifle, his eyes sharp and focused. Lyra's breath quickened. This wasn't soldiers. The rhythm was different, slower, heavier. She had lived in these tunnels long enough to know. Something else lurked here. The sound echoed again, closer this time, like claws dragging across rock. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, whispering, "It's not human." Her voice trembled with fear. Mark didn't argue. He lifted his lamp higher, scanning the darkness ahead. The light caught movement, something low to the ground, shifting quickly out of sight. Lyra's nails dug into the stone, her body trembling. "I've seen them before," she whispered, her words shaky. "Tunnel beasts. They hunt anything that moves." Mark tightened his grip on the rifle, but his expression remained calm. He turned his head slightly toward her. "Stay behind me." His voice carried no fear, only command. The creature hissed from the shadows, a sound that echoed through the tunnel like boiling steam. The stench of rot filled the air. Lyra covered her mouth, eyes wide, terror flashing across her face. Memories rushed back, times she had seen others torn apart by these beasts, the reason she had always avoided the deeper tunnels. But this time she wasn't alone. Mark stepped forward, placing himself between her and the sound. His shadow stretched tall against the wall, his figure like a shield. The beast lunged from the dark, long claws, sharp teeth, eyes gleaming in the lamplight. Mark raised his rifle and fired. The blast shook the tunnel, stone dust raining from above. The creature shrieked and vanished back into the black, its howl echoing far into the depths. The silence that followed was tense. Lyra's whole body shook. She clutched her chest, gasping. But when she looked at him, standing steady with the rifle still warm in his hands, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt safe. Mark lowered the weapon slowly, checking the tunnel once more before turning back. He crouched in front of her, his eyes steady. "It's gone, for now, but we move at first light." She nodded quickly, still catching her breath. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to speak. Why didn't you leave me? You could have run faster alone. Her voice cracked on the last word, almost breaking. Mark's gaze softened. He didn't give a long explanation, didn't try to make her understand everything. He simply said, "Because I don't leave people behind." The simplicity of the words struck her deeper than anything else he could have said. Her eyes burned with tears. And before she could stop herself, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. Her body shook, not just from fear, but from the weight of finally being allowed to trust. Mark didn't push her away. He let her rest there, his hand lightly resting on her back. His breathing was calm, steady, and for her, it felt like a promise. The tunnel remained dark and full of dangers, but Lyra's heart was no longer the same. She had lived her whole life unseen, unloved, and despised. Now, sitting beside this human soldier in the cold underground, she felt something that had always been denied to her. She felt like she mattered. The noises of the beast faded into the distance, and though danger still lingered, Lyra allowed her eyes to close. For the first time in years, she let sleep come without fear of never waking. Mark stayed awake, guarding her through the night, his rifle ready, his eyes sharp. And in the silence of the tunnels, two lives that had once been nothing more than shadows began to bind together, stronger than the darkness around them. Morning light crept through cracks in the stone ceiling, faint but enough to push back the darkness of the tunnels. Mark shook Lyra gently, and her glowing eyes opened slowly. For a moment, she looked confused, as if she thought she had dreamed everything: the food, the water, the safety of sleeping without fear. But then she saw him beside her, his rifle resting across his knees, his eyes steady and alert. He had stayed awake the entire night to guard her. No one had ever done that before. Her chest tightened with something she could not name. They rose and began to move again. The tunnels twisted and turned like a maze, but Mark led the way with careful steps. Lyra stayed close, almost touching his back, her bare feet silent on the stone. Strange noises echoed from deeper in the earth, but nothing attacked them again. After hours of walking, they found a broken set of stairs leading up. At the top, a wooden door leaned off its hinges. Mark pushed it open, and sunlight flooded in. Lyra gasped softly, shielding her eyes. She hadn't felt warm daylight on her skin in years. The wind carried scents of grass and soil instead of rot and smoke. They stepped out into a field at the edge of the ruined city, far from the soldiers' patrol routes. In the distance stood an old farmhouse, half broken but still standing. Its roof sagged, and weeds covered the walls, but compared to the tunnels, it looked like a palace. Mark led her there, kicking the door open. Dust swirled in the air, but the rooms inside were dry and open. He tested the floorboards, checking for danger, then nodded. "This will do," he said simply. Lyra stood in the doorway, her eyes wide. A home. She had not been inside one since her family was taken from her. Mark dropped his pack and began clearing space. He dragged a broken chair aside, swept dust away with his boots, and set down his small supplies. Then he looked at her. "Here," he said, pointing to a corner near the window. "It's warmer there." She moved slowly, almost afraid. She touched the wall, the wooden frame of the window, the rough floor. Everything felt unreal, like a dream that might vanish if she blinked. Mark found an old blanket in his pack, thin but still useful. He spread it on the floor like a small bed. When Lyra saw it, tears welled in her eyes. She pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering, "For me?" Mark nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "For you." She knelt on the blanket, her fingers trembling as she touched the fabric. It was rough, but to her, it felt softer than anything she had ever known. Her chest shook with quiet sobs. She didn't want to cry, but she couldn't stop. All her life, people had called her filth, driven her into the shadows. Now, someone had given her not just food or water, but a place to rest. Mark crouched beside her. "You don't belong in shadows anymore," he said gently. His words carried no pity, only truth. Lyra looked at him through her tears, her lips trembling. She wanted to tell him how much it meant, but words failed her. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her forehead touching his arm in silent gratitude. The farmhouse filled with quiet. Outside, the wind rustled through the tall grass. For the first time, Lyra felt what safety could be. She closed her eyes, letting herself breathe without fear. But peace never lasted long. From far in the distance, the sound of horns drifted through the air. Low, mournful, and unmistakable, the soldiers were still searching. Mark's eyes narrowed. He stood, moving to the window. Dusty light fell across his face as he scanned the horizon. Lyra rose too, her body tense. "They're not finished," she whispered, her voice full of dread. She thought the soldiers would come and burn this new place down, just like they had burned everything else in her life. Her legs shook, ready to flee. But Mark placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and calm. "Let them come," he said. "We'll be ready." His words stunned her. Not "you should hide" or "you should run," but "we." He had included her again. Her fear didn't vanish, but it changed into something else, strength, borrowed from him. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just a soldier, but someone who had chosen to stand with her, no matter the danger. Lyra turned back to the window. The sunlight touched her clean skin, making her glowing patterns shimmer faintly. She wasn't filth anymore. She wasn't cursed. She was Lyra, and she was alive. Her voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. "All my life, I was filth. You gave me water, food, and dignity." Her eyes burned with tears, but her tone was steady. "Why?" Mark glanced at her, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he said softly, "Because everyone deserves a chance to be seen." The words cut through her like light-piercing fog. She pressed her lips together, afraid to cry again, but a small smile escaped her. For the first time, she let herself believe she wasn't just a shadow anymore. The farmhouse was broken, the world outside full of war and danger, and soldiers still hunted her. Yet none of that mattered as much as this single truth. She was no longer alone. Lyra leaned against the window frame, looking out at the horizon. The horn still echoed, a reminder that their journey was far from over. But instead of despair, she felt a strange fire inside. Hope. Mark checked his rifle, setting it by the door. His movements were calm, controlled, as if danger didn't shake him. Lyra watched him, her heart tightening with something she didn't understand, something between trust, gratitude, and the first fragile spark of belonging. As the sun climbed higher, the broken farmhouse became more than just a shelter. It became the beginning of something new. For Lyra, it was proof that she was no longer a creature of shadows. She was someone worth saving, someone who could still walk into the light. And though the horns of war grew louder, she no longer trembled alone. Beside her stood the human who had seen her when no one else would. That single choice had changed everything, and it was only the beginning of their story.